The brochure had promised an unforgettable journey through history, a cutting-edge augmented reality experience that would transport us to the heart of the Battle of Blackwood Mire. It was a niche tour, appealing to history buffs and tech enthusiasts alike, but for me, Elias Thorne, a jaded freelance journalist always chasing the next big story, it was just another assignment. A quick piece on the intersection of history and technology, a few hundred words, and then back to the mundane. I couldn't have been more wrong. The Blackwood Mire was a desolate, windswept expanse in the north of England, notorious for a brutal, forgotten battle fought centuries ago. A skirmish, really, between warring feudal lords, but one so savage, so utterly devoid of mercy, that local folklore still whispered of the ground being cursed, of the mire itself drinking the blood of the fallen. Superstitious nonsense, of course. I'd seen worse battlefields, read darker histories. Our guide, a young woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation, she'd quickly clarified, though the coincidence was unsettling, was a picture of academic enthusiasm. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, though bright with passion for her subject, held a certain weary intensity. She was the lead developer of the Echoes of Blackwood AR system, a project she spoke of with almost maternal pride. "Welcome, gentlemen," she began, addressing our small group of 5, myself, an elderly couple who looked perpetually bewildered, and a burly man with a military haircut who introduced himself as Major Davies, a retired history professor. "You are about to witness history not as a static image but as a living, breathing specter. Our proprietary Echoes AR system overlays historical data, topographical scans, and even speculative audio recreations onto your real-time view of the mire. You won't just see the battlefield, you'll experience it." She handed each of us a sleek, lightweight headset. They were surprisingly comfortable, fitting snugly over my ears and resting just above my eyes, like a pair of futuristic spectacles. The lenses were tinted but not opaque, allowing the real world to bleed through, albeit with a faint digital overlay. "The mire itself," Dr. Thorne continued, her voice amplified slightly through the headset, "is a challenging environment. The ground is soft, treacherous in places, and the weather can turn without warning. Please stick to the designated path. Any deviation, and the system will alert you, and for your safety, we'll have to pause the experience." As we began our trek, the world through the AR lenses shimmered. The dull, brown expanse of the mire began to populate with ghostly figures. Faint outlines of men in ancient armor, their movements jerky and ethereal, flickered into existence. The air filled with the distant clang of steel, the muffled shouts of commanders, and the mournful cries of what sounded like wounded animals. It was incredibly immersive, almost too real. "This is the initial phase," Dr. Thorne explained, her voice calm amidst the simulated chaos. "A low-fidelity representation to acclimate you. As we progress, the fidelity will increase, the details will sharpen, and the sounds will become more distinct." Major Davies, surprisingly, was the most vocal. "Remarkable. Truly remarkable, Dr. Thorne. The spatial accuracy is impeccable." The elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, seemed less impressed, or perhaps just overwhelmed. Mrs. Henderson clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide. "Oh dear. It's rather lively, isn't it?" I focused on the details. The digital soldiers wore the crude, heavy armor of the period, their faces obscured by visored helmets. Their weapons, long spears and broadswords, glinted with an unnatural light. The ground beneath them, though still the real mire, appeared scarred and churned, as if thousands of feet had indeed trampled it into submission. As we moved deeper, the echoes lived up to their name. The spectral figures gained a terrifying solidity. Their armor gleamed, their movements became fluid, and their faces, though still somewhat blurred, began to show expressions: grim determination, fear, agony. The sounds intensified, the clash of swords becoming a deafening roar, the shouts turning into guttural screams. I could almost feel the vibrations of the battle through the ground. "Here," Dr. Thorne said, stopping us at a particularly boggy section, "is where the first major charge occurred. The Miremen, as they were called, a local militia, attempted to flank Lord Ashworth's cavalry." As she spoke, the AR system highlighted a group of figures, their digital forms glowing faintly. They were charging through the mire, their boots sinking deep, their faces contorted in effort. Then, from the opposite side, came the thundering hooves of spectral horses, their riders bearing down with lances lowered. The collision was visceral. The AR system, with disturbing accuracy, rendered the impact, the splintering of wood, the sickening thud of bodies, the cries of men and horses. I flinched, despite knowing it wasn't real. My heart hammered against my ribs. Major Davies let out a low whistle. Good heavens. The realism is profound. Mrs. Henderson gasped. It's too much. Can we turn it down? Dr. Thorne smiled reassuringly. It's just data, Mrs. Henderson. Your mind knows it's not real. But if you wish, you can adjust the intensity on the side of your headset. I tried to adjust mine, but my fingers fumbled. The simulated chaos was overwhelming, and for a moment, I felt a genuine tremor of fear. It was the sheer volume, the relentless assault on the senses. I reminded myself it was a trick of light and sound, a sophisticated illusion. Then something shifted. A digital soldier, his face a mask of digital agony, fell at my feet. His virtual blood, a shimmering crimson, splattered across the virtual ground. But as I watched, the shimmering crimson seemed to deepen, to take on a disturbing wetness. And for a fleeting second I smelled something metallic, something like iron and damp earth. I blinked hard. The smell vanished. The blood was just a digital effect again. My mind was playing tricks on me. The immersion was just that good. We continued, each section of the mire revealing a new horror from the past. Dr. Thorne explained the strategies, the turning points, the individual acts of heroism and cowardice. She spoke with academic detachment, but the scenes unfolding before us were anything but detached. At one point, we stood near what the AR system identified as a field hospital. Spectral figures lay groaning on the ground, attended by others. The air was thick with simulated cries of pain. A figure, a medic perhaps, knelt over a fallen soldier, his digital hands moving with grim purpose. As I watched, the medic's hands seemed to blur, to become more solid. His face, once indistinct, sharpened, revealing a gaunt, sweat-streaked visage. His eyes, though still digital, held a profound weariness, a deep, abiding sorrow. He looked up, and for a terrifying instant, his gaze seemed to meet mine. A chill ran down my spine. It was just a program, a sophisticated algorithm. It couldn't see me. Are you all right, Mr. Thorne? Dr. Thorne asked, her voice cutting through the simulated din. I realized I had stopped, staring intently at the medic. Yes, fine. Just, the detail is incredible. She nodded, pleased. We spared no expense in historical accuracy. Every detail, from the stitching on their tunics to the expressions on their faces, is based on extensive research. We moved on, but the encounter with the medic lingered. It felt different from the other interactions. More personal. More real. The climax of the tour was the final stand, where the last remnants of Lord Ashworth's forces were cornered against a rocky outcrop. The AR system went into overdrive. Thousands of figures clashed, the air a maelstrom of screams, steel, and the sickening sounds of combat. I saw a soldier, his back to the outcrop, fighting with desperate fury against 3 attackers. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, his movements powerful even in his digital form. He parried a blow, thrust his sword, and one of his attackers dissolved into shimmering pixels. But the other 2 pressed on. As he fought, his face, previously a blur, became shockingly clear. He had a scarred cheek, a broken nose, and eyes that burned with a fierce, defiant light. He was losing, I could tell. His movements were slowing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then one of his attackers lunged, a spear piercing his side. The soldier roared, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, and collapsed. His digital blood, a torrent of crimson, gushed onto the virtual ground. And then, it happened. A gasp escaped my lips. The ground beneath my feet, the real muddy earth of Blackwood Mire, began to darken. A spreading stain, the exact shade of the digital blood, seeped into the soil. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. The metallic tang, stronger this time, filled my nostrils, making me gag. What is that? Mrs. Henderson whimpered, pointing with a trembling finger. Dr. Thorne, who had been explaining the tactical significance of the final stand, turned, her eyes widening behind her own AR lenses. Her academic composure shattered. That's not part of the simulation. Major Davies, ever the pragmatist, knelt, touching the dark, wet patch. He recoiled, his face pale. It's blood. Real blood. A collective shiver ran through our small group. The simulated battle raged around us, but now the line between the virtual and the real had not just blurred, it had dissolved. The fallen soldier, the one with the scarred face, lay on the ground. His digital form was fading, but his eyes, those defiant, burning eyes, were still fixed on me. And as I watched, a single bloody tear seemed to track down his scarred cheek. Panic began to set in. The screams of the digital soldiers, once a mere auditory effect, now felt like genuine cries of anguish. The clang of steel was no longer a recording, It was a deafening, terrifying reality. "Dr. Thorne," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Turn it off. Turn it off now." She was fumbling with her own headset, her hands shaking. I don't understand. This has never happened before. The system it's stable." But it wasn't stable. The spectral figures around us were no longer fading. They were solidifying. Their armor clanked with a heavy, real sound. Their faces, once blurred, were now horrifyingly distinct, contorted in rage, fear, and the grim resolve of men fighting for their lives. A soldier, his face a mask of pure fury, lunged past me, his real sharp sword glinting dangerously close to my ear. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the mire. "This isn't real," I screamed, trying to convince myself as much as the others. "It's just the AR. It's a glitch." But the cold, hard steel of the sword, the stench of blood, the terrified screams of the Hendersons, none of it felt like a glitch. Major Davies, surprisingly, pulled a small, sturdy knife from his belt. "Stay close. This is beyond anything I've ever seen." The battlefield was no longer a historical recreation. It was happening around us, to us. The digital overlay had become a terrifying, physical reality. Dr. Thorne, her face ashen, finally managed to rip off her headset. The world snapped back into its dull, muddy reality. But the sounds remained. The distant clash of steel, the guttural shouts, the screams of the dying. They were fainter but undeniably there. It's bleeding through," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The residual energy, the trauma, it's manifesting." The Hendersons were huddled together, sobbing uncontrollably. Mrs. Henderson was hyperventilating. "We need to get out of here," Major Davies said, his voice grim. "Now." We started to move, stumbling through the treacherous mire. With the headsets off, the visual horrors were gone, but the auditory ones persisted, and the chilling knowledge that the battle was somehow real was far worse. As we hurried, a piercing shriek echoed across the mire. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. We all froze. "What was that?" Mr. Henderson gasped. Dr. Thorne's eyes were wide with a dawning horror. That's the cry of Lord Ashworth's standard-bearer. According to the historical records, he was disemboweled here. And then, just ahead of us, a figure materialized. Not a shimmering AR ghost, but a solid, blood-soaked man. He was clutching his stomach, his face a mask of unbearable pain. His eyes, milky white and unfocused, rolled in his head. He took one stumbling step, then collapsed, his body hitting the muddy ground with a sickening thud. A pool of dark, viscous fluid began to spread around him. Mrs. Henderson let out a strangled scream and fainted. "We have to help her," Mr. Henderson cried, bending over his wife. "No," Dr. Thorne shouted, pulling him away. "Don't touch them. Don't interact. We don't know what will happen." The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of death and damp earth. More figures began to appear, flickering into existence like faulty projections, but then solidifying into terrifying reality. A cavalryman, his horse a spectral, snorting beast, galloped past us, his lance lowered. He was aiming for something or someone just beyond our sight. Major Davies grabbed Mrs. Henderson, slinging her over his shoulder with surprising strength. "Run. Just run." We ran. The mire, already difficult to navigate, became a terrifying obstacle course. The ground seemed to suck at our boots, trying to hold us back. The sounds of battle intensified, surrounding us, closing in. I could hear the heavy breathing of unseen men, the guttural roars of dying soldiers, the whinnying of horses. I glanced back. The battlefield was alive. Hundreds of figures, some still shimmering, others horrifyingly real, were fighting, dying, screaming. The ground was littered with bodies, some digital, some disturbingly corporeal, their wounds gaping, their blood staining the earth. "The exit," Dr. Thorne yelled, pointing to a faint glimmer of light in the distance. It was the small hut where the tour began, our only link to the sane world. But between us and the hut, the phantom battle raged. We had to push through it. A soldier, his face contorted in a silent scream, stumbled towards me, his hand outstretched. His fingers, caked with mud and something dark, brushed against my arm. A searing cold shot through me, a chilling sensation that felt like ice and fire simultaneously. I cried out, tearing my arm away. The soldier's eyes, full of an ancient despair, seemed to bore into my soul before he dissolved into mist. "Don't touch them," Dr. Thorne screamed again. "Whatever you do, don't touch them." We pressed on, weaving through the spectral and real figures. Major Davies, despite his age, moved with a surprising agility, protecting the unconscious Mrs. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, pale and shaking, clung to Dr. Thorne's arm. I, for my part, felt a primal terror that eclipsed everything else. My journalistic detachment had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, animalistic need to survive. The hut seemed impossibly far. The sounds of battle were deafening now, the air thick with the smell of blood and fear. I could feel the vibrations of heavy footsteps, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. It was as if the entire battlefield had been resurrected, and we were trapped within its bloody embrace. Suddenly Major Davies stumbled. He had stepped into a particularly deep bog, and his leg sank up to his knee. He struggled, but the mire held him fast. "Go!" he roared, pushing Mrs. Henderson towards us. "Leave me. Get out." "No!" Mr. Henderson cried, trying to pull him free. But as he struggled, a spectral figure, a knight in full plate armor, materialized directly in front of him. The knight raised a massive two-handed sword. The blade, though still slightly transparent, glinted with a terrifying sharpness. "No!" Dr. Thorne shrieked. The sword descended. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the sickening sound. But there was nothing. When I opened them, the knight was gone, dissolved into shimmering pixels. Major Davies was still stuck, his face a mask of terror but unharmed. It's not physical," he gasped, his voice hoarse. "Not always. But the fear is real." He was right. The sheer, overwhelming terror was more potent than any physical threat. It was a psychological assault, a direct pipeline to the primal fear of death and violence. With a concerted effort, Dr. Thorne and Mr. Henderson managed to pull Major Davies free. His boot was lost in the mire, but he was on his feet. We continued our desperate dash towards the hut. As we neared the edge of the mire, the intensity of the manifestations began to wane. The sounds became fainter, the figures more transparent. The air, though still heavy, began to clear of the metallic tang. We burst into the small hut, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling. The interior was blessedly normal. A few chairs, a small table, a control panel for the AR system. Dr. Thorne immediately went to the panel, her fingers flying across the keys. "I'm shutting it down," she muttered, her voice tight with suppressed panic. "A full system purge. It can't happen again." Mrs. Henderson slowly came to, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around, bewildered, then her gaze landed on the mud and bloodstains on Major Davies' trousers. Her eyes widened in renewed terror. "It was real," she whispered. "It was all real." We spent the next hour in the hut, trying to process what had happened. Dr. Thorne, usually so articulate, was a mess of scientific jargon and panicked explanations. She spoke of quantum entanglement, residual psychometric energy, and unforeseen bleed-through. None of it made sense, not really. All I knew was that a historical recreation had become a living nightmare. Major Davies, after the initial shock, became surprisingly calm. He examined the mud on his trousers, the faint, lingering smell of iron. "The mire, it remembers," he said, his voice low. "The land itself holds the echoes of what happened here. Your technology, Dr. Thorne, it didn't just project the past, it unlocked it." I couldn't shake the image of the dying soldier, his eyes fixed on mine, a bloody tear tracking down his cheek. And the cold, searing touch on my arm. Was it just a hallucination brought on by extreme stress? Or had I truly touched a ghost? We eventually made our way back to the main road, where a small van was waiting to take us back to civilization. The drive was silent, punctuated only by the occasional sniffle from Mrs. Henderson. Back in my hotel room, I tried to write my article. But the words wouldn't come. How could I describe what I had witnessed? How could I explain that a technological marvel had inadvertently opened a portal to a centuries-old massacre? No one would believe me. They'd say I was crazy, that the immersion had simply been too much for my fragile journalistic sensibilities. I tried to rationalize it. Mass hallucination. A shared delusion. The power of suggestion. But the blood on the mire, the distinct smell, the palpable fear, it was too real. That night I couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old hotel building sounded like the distant clang of steel. I kept seeing the faces of the digital soldiers, their eyes burning with defiance and despair. The next morning I packed my bags, eager to leave Blackwood Mire behind. As I was checking out, the hotel receptionist, a kindly older woman, looked at me with concern. "You look a bit peaked, dear," she said. "The mire can be a bit much for some folks. Especially after a visit to the battlefield." "It was an experience," I managed, trying to sound nonchalant. She nodded knowingly. They say the ground there, it never truly forgets. Some folks, they come back from those tours and they say they can still hear the screams. My blood ran cold. Hear the screams? She leaned in conspiratorially. Oh yes. And sometimes they say they see things. Just out of the corner of their eye. A flash of armor. A shadow moving where there shouldn't be one. The mire, it has a way of clinging to you. I paid my bill, my hands trembling. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a spectral cavalryman riding behind me. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whispered command, every distant siren like a dying man's cry. I tried to dismiss it as post-traumatic stress, a vivid imagination working overtime. But the feeling of that cold, searing touch on my arm lingered. And the image of the bloody tear. Days turned into weeks. I tried to go back to my normal life, to write about mundane topics, to forget the horrors of Blackwood Mire. But the mire had indeed clung to me. I started seeing things. At first they were subtle. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow that wasn't quite right. Then they became more distinct. A fleeting glimpse of a helmeted head in a crowded street. A faint, metallic smell in my apartment that no amount of cleaning could eradicate. My sleep became a torment. I was plagued by nightmares of the battlefield, of being caught in the thick of the fighting, of the cold touch of spectral hands. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. My friends noticed. My editor called, concerned about my missed deadlines and increasingly erratic behavior. I tried to explain, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. How could I tell them about an AR tour that had unleashed the dead? One evening, I was walking home, the city lights a comforting balm against the encroaching darkness of my mind. I passed a construction site, and the rhythmic clang of hammers against metal suddenly morphed into the clash of swords. The shouts of the workers became the guttural cries of men in battle. I stumbled, clutching my head, trying to block out the sounds. Passers-by stared, their faces a blur of concern and confusion. Then I saw him. Standing at the edge of the construction site, amidst the scaffolding and concrete, was the soldier. The one with the scarred face, the one who had fallen at my feet in the mire, the one whose bloody tear I had seen. He was solid, terrifyingly real, his ancient armor glinting under the streetlights. His eyes, those defiant, burning eyes, were fixed on me. He raised a hand, a gesture of, what? Warning? Plea? Threat? I screamed a raw, primal sound and ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I collapsed, gasping for air, in the safety of my apartment. I locked the door, drew the blinds, and huddled in a corner, trembling. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was bleeding into my life. The AR tour had not just shown me the past, it had brought the past to me. I called Dr. Thorne. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I called Major Davies. No answer. The Hendersons, I assumed, were too traumatized to speak to anyone. I was alone. Alone with the ghosts of Blackwood Mire. The manifestations grew bolder. I would wake to the faint sounds of marching feet outside my window. I would see fleeting glimpses of armored figures in my apartment, just at the edge of my vision. The metallic smell of blood became a constant companion. I stopped leaving my apartment. I ordered groceries online, paid my bills electronically. The outside world, once a refuge, was now a potential battlefield. One morning I found a patch of damp, dark earth on my living room carpet. It was small, no bigger than my hand, but it was unmistakably the same mire from Blackwood. And clinging to it, a single withered blade of grass, stained a faint, rust-like color. My sanity was fraying. I knew it. But how could I seek help when the source of my torment was so utterly unbelievable? I tried to fight back. I researched the Battle of Blackwood Mire, devouring every scrap of information I could find. I learned the names of the commanders, the tactics used, the estimated casualties. I hoped that by understanding it, I could somehow control it, banish it. But the more I learned, the more real it became. The names I read in dusty historical texts became the faces I saw in my nightmares. The casualty numbers became the screams I heard in the dead of night. One night, I was sitting in my living room, the lights off, trying to find some peace in the darkness. The air grew cold, heavy. The familiar scent of blood filled the room. Then a whisper. Faint but distinct. Help us. I froze. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. The voice was ancient, raspy, filled with an unbearable sorrow. Who are you? I whispered back, my voice trembling. A figure materialized directly in front of me. It was the medic from the battlefield, the one with the weary eyes. He was no longer transparent. He was solid, his face etched with profound despair. The mire, it holds us, he rasped, his voice barely audible. Trapped between worlds. His hand, solid and cold, reached out towards me. I recoiled, remembering Dr. Thorne's warning, "Don't touch them." But his eyes, filled with an unbearable sadness, pleaded with me. It opened the way," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "It gave us a voice, a path." "What do you want?" I asked, my fear warring with a strange sense of empathy. "Release," he whispered. "Release us from this torment." "How?" He pointed a trembling finger towards my old, dusty laptop. "The system, it is still active. Even shut down, the echoes remain. You can close the gate." I stared at him, then at my laptop. Could it be true? Could the AR system, even in its deactivated state, still be a conduit? "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes filled with an ancient, profound gratitude. "Find the core, the heart of the echo. Sever the connection." Then he began to fade, his form dissolving into shimmering pixels until he was gone. But the coldness, the scent of blood, and the desperate plea remained. I stumbled to my laptop, my mind racing. The core. The heart of the echo. Dr. Thorne had mentioned proprietary algorithms and topographical scans. It had to be in the data, the very source code of the AR system. I remembered Dr. Thorne's casual mention of her work. She had shown me a brief glimpse of the system's architecture, a complex web of algorithms and data streams. I was a journalist, not a programmer, but I knew enough to navigate basic file structures. I spent the rest of the night and the entire next day hunched over my laptop, a frantic, desperate energy driving me. I hacked into Dr. Thorne's cloud storage, using a few tricks I'd picked up over the years. Her files were heavily encrypted, but my desperation fueled a surprising ingenuity. I found it. A folder labeled Echoes _. Inside, thousands of lines of code, complex algorithms, and massive data files. It was overwhelming. But then I saw a file prominently labeled Meyer_resonance_matrix.dat. Resonance. That was the word the medic had used. The residual energy. This had to be it. I opened the file. It was a massive data dump, filled with what looked like topographical coordinates, historical timestamps, and complex energy signatures. It was the digital fingerprint of the battlefield, the very essence of its haunted past. My fingers hovered over the delete key. This was it. The key to my sanity, to their release. But what if I was wrong? What if deleting it made things worse? What if it unleashed them completely, irrevocably? I thought of the soldier with the scarred face, his bloody tear. The medic's pleading eyes. Their torment was real. My torment was real. I had to try. With a deep breath, I pressed the delete key. A warning popped up. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete Meyer_resonance_matrix.dat? This action cannot be undone." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then I clicked yes. The file vanished. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I held my breath, waiting. Then the coldness began to recede. The metallic scent of blood, which had been a constant companion for weeks, began to fade. The shadows in my peripheral vision seemed to solidify, to become just shadows again. I waited. And waited. The night passed. I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the first truly peaceful sleep I had experienced in weeks. When I woke, the sun was streaming through my window. The apartment felt normal. The air was clean, fresh. There was no lingering scent of death, no chilling cold. I cautiously walked through my apartment. No dark patches of mire on the carpet. No flickering figures in the corners of my eyes. The sounds of the city outside were just that, the sounds of the city, not the echoes of a battlefield. I was free. I never wrote the article about the AR tour. How could I? No one would believe me. Instead, I wrote a fictionalized account, a horror story, drawing heavily on my experiences, but cloaking them in the veil of fiction. It became a bestseller. I never contacted Dr. Thorne or Major Davies again. I assumed they too had their own battles to fight, their own demons to banish. But sometimes, on a quiet night, when the wind howls just right, I think I can still hear a faint whisper carried on the breeze. "Thank you." And I wonder, did I truly sever the connection? Or did I merely give them a moment of peace, a temporary respite from their eternal torment? The Blackwood Mire, after all, never truly forgets. And neither, I suspect, do its ghosts.